My name is Emily. I'm 30 years old, and last week, my mother called me crying for the first time in my life. She needs a caregiver now. And before she even finished asking, I already knew the exact 4 words I was going to say back to her. 2 years ago, I was the one crying. I'd just been told I had stage 3 cancer at 28, and my mother answered me with a single sentence I will never forget. 6 months of chemo, 36 appointments, not one visit from my family. They were too busy planning my sister's wedding. But here's the part none of them ever bothered to check. While I was losing my hair, my mother was quietly signing a piece of paper with my sister's name on it. Welcome back to Family Reckoning, where we tell quiet stories about people who finally stop apologizing for taking up space. If you've ever been the family member everyone is expected to sacrifice, this one is for you. Be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back 2 years to a Tuesday afternoon and a phone call from my doctor. Before the call, my life looked steady from the outside. I worked as a paralegal at a small elder law firm in Manchester, drafting Medicaid applications and reading other people's deeds all day. I was good at it. I stayed late because the work made sense in a way my family never did. Columns that added up, rules that applied to everyone the same. I had a 1-bedroom condo I'd bought myself, a coffee maker I babied, and a habit of being the person who handled things. I booked my mother's eye appointments. I did my sister's taxes for free every April. When something broke in that family, the phone always rang on my end, never the other way around. My friends, the few I kept, called me dependable, which is a polite word for a woman who can't say no. I told myself that was a strength. I was the one who read the fine print, the one who knew that gifting a house to a child can quietly destroy a parent's care later, the one clients thanked while their relatives stood around looking useless. I never once imagined I'd open a county records page and find my own mother in it. That afternoon, I was in the firm's back office, sorting a stack of nursing home invoices for a client when my cell buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it ring. I picked up out of the same instinct that ran my whole life, the need to make sure nothing went unhandled. A nurse said my name, then said my doctor wanted me to come in the next morning. People don't ask you to come in the morning for good news. I sat with that stack of invoices a long time after she hung up. You should know the shape of my family before I tell you the rest. My father died when I was 12, and after that, my mother, Linda, ran the house like a woman guarding the last lifeboat. There was always exactly enough, and it always went to my sister. Rachel is 4 years younger, the soft one, the one who cried easily and got comforted for it. When Rachel wanted college, my mother wrote the checks. When I wanted college, I took out loans and was told it would build character. By the time I was 28, I'd nearly paid them off. Rachel had a degree, a fiancé, and a wedding budget that grew every month. None of this was secret. My mother had a phrase she used at every Sunday dinner, standing over her blue Pyrex dish of pot roast, the same chipped casserole she'd used since I was a kid. This house, she'd say, stays in the family, the real family. You understand. I understood. The real family had husbands and grandchildren on the way. I was the spare set of hands, the daughter who'd have time because I hadn't filled my life with the right people. My mother believed this, the way some people believe in weather. She'd watched her own mother get cared for by an unmarried aunt who gave up everything, and she decided that was simply how the world sorted itself. The married daughter kept the house. The single daughter kept the schedule clear. I'd heard it so many times it stopped landing. What I didn't know yet, that Tuesday night, was how soon both of those roles would be tested and how fast my mother would forget which daughter she'd actually need. The next morning, My doctor didn't dress it up. Stage 3. Hodgkin lymphoma, she said. The kind that's treatable, but won't wait. We start chemo in 2 weeks. I sat in that little exam room and did the thing I always do, which is go to work in my head. I asked about the protocol. I asked how many cycles. I asked what my out-of-pocket exposure would be after insurance, because I'd seen enough clients blindsided by the gap to know the gap is where families fall apart. She wrote numbers on a pad, and I copied them into my phone like I was taking notes for someone else. I didn't cry. Crying was something I'd never quite been allowed. In my family, my feelings were always scheduled around someone else's bigger moment. I walked out to the parking garage, found my car on the 3rd level, and sat with my hands at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock like I was about to drive somewhere. I wasn't. I was just breathing, counting the concrete pillars, doing the math on how a person handles this alone. And then I did what every part of me, even the smart part, still defaulted to. I scrolled to the contact that said, Mom. My thumb hovered over it. I told myself, she was my mother. That this was the one thing too big to handle by myself. That surely a cancer diagnosis was the line she wouldn't step over. I want you to understand, I wasn't naive. I just wanted one time to be wrong about her. I pressed the green circle. It rang twice. She picked up sounding distracted, half laughing at something on her end, and asked what I needed, because with me, there was always a reason. I told her plainly. I said, Mom, I have cancer, stage 3. I start chemo in 2 weeks, and I'm scared, and I don't want to do this by myself. There was a pause on the line, and in it, I could hear my sister's voice in the background, asking about ribbon colors. My mother exhaled the way she did when I'd brought her an inconvenience. Then she said it, and I can still hear the exact flatness of her voice. We can't deal with this right now, she said. Your sister is planning her wedding. I waited for the rest. I waited for, but of course we'll be there. Or, send me the schedule. Or even just, I'm sorry. Instead, she filled the silence with logistics. The wedding was in 4 months. There was the venue, the dress, Rachel's nerves. You've always been the strong one, she told me. You'll figure it out. You don't need us hovering. I heard her cover the phone and tell Rachel she'd be right there. Then, almost kindly, she added the part that finished me. Try not to worry your sister with this, she said. She's so stressed already. I said, okay, that's the worst part. Looking back, I said okay in my normal voice, like she'd asked me to pick up napkins. We hung up. I sat in my car in the dark of that garage and understood, finally and completely, that there had never been a line. There was only ever a calendar. And my life had simply landed on a bad date. I didn't call her again for a very long time, but I did start watching the way you watch whether you no longer trust, for the day it would all turn around and come looking for me. I gave it a few days, then I tried the other direction. I texted Rachel, careful and small, the way you approach someone you're afraid of needing. I told her about the diagnosis. I asked if she might come with me to the first chemo, just so I wouldn't walk in alone. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear for almost an hour. When she finally answered, it was a paragraph about her dress fitting, and then the line that I would carry around for 2 years like a stone in my shoe. You don't even have a family of your own, Em, she wrote. You have time for this stuff. I don't. I read it 4 times, trying to find the part where she misunderstood. There wasn't one. To my sister, my being single and childless wasn't a private fact of my life. It was a resource the family got to spend. My empty calendar belonged to them. Her full one was sacred. I called my mother, hoping she'd be embarrassed on Rachel's behalf, and instead, she sided with her instantly, gently, like she was explaining something obvious to a slow child. "It's not as if you have a husband waiting at home," she said. "Rachel needs support right now." The way they said it, support, like Rachel was the one walking into a room to be poisoned on a schedule. I put the phone face down on my kitchen counter and stood there for a while. Something in me went quiet that day. Not broken, just quiet. The way a house goes quiet after the last guest finally leaves. I stopped asking. I'd ask the universe for help before I'd ask either of them again. As it turned out, the universe sent a retired school teacher named Barbara. 2 weeks later, I drove myself to my first infusion. The chemo suite was on the 4th floor, a long room of recliners arranged in a half circle, each one with an IV pole standing beside it like a patient relative. I checked in, gave my arm, and watched a nurse hang the first bag. She must have seen me sitting there with nobody because she came back with a folded blanket and tucked it across my lap without making it a thing. It was teal hospital issue fleece, the edge already worn soft and pilled from 100 washes. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't special, but it was the only thing in that building that touched me with any kind of care that day, and I held on to it like it was. I'd brought my laptop because of course I had, and I answered client emails through the first hour, drafting a benefits application while a stranger's chemicals dripped into my chest. Around me, the other chairs were full of caregivers. A husband doing a crossword out loud, a grown son reading the sports page to his mother, a young couple sharing earbuds, one screen, two faces leaning in. I counted 19 chairs and 18 companions. And then there was me and a borrowed teal blanket, ground enough to keep me in my body. When the bag emptied, the nurse asked if someone was picking me up. I told her I was fine to drive, which was a lie, and I drove home anyway, with my hands shaking on the wheel and the radio off. I folded the blanket the next visit and brought it back, ashamed to keep it. The visit after that, the nurse just smiled and let me keep it. I still have it. The Sunday dinners went on without me, of course. They'd always been the center of my mother's world, the one ritual she protected, and now they tightened around the wedding like a fist. I'd see the evidence the next morning in the family group chat, a photo of the blue Pyrex steaming on the counter, a caption like, "Wish you were here. Sweetie," never once attached to an actual invitation, or a ride, or an offer to bring me a plate. That dish had fed me my whole childhood, and now it photographed a table that had quietly removed my seat. I learned not to open the chat on Monday mornings. Meanwhile, the bills started arriving the way they do, in plain envelopes with quiet violence inside. After insurance, my share came to just under $38,200. I sold the few stocks I had. I dropped every subscription, ate from my pantry, and put the rest on a payment plan that would follow me for years. When the gap got tight, in month 3, I broke my own rule and asked my mother if she could float me even a few thousand until a reimbursement came through. She answered fast for once. "We just put down the deposit on Rachel's venue," she said. "There's nothing extra right now. You'll manage. You always do." I didn't argue. By then, arguing felt like knocking on a door I already knew was locked, but I noticed the order of it, the way I always notice the fine print. The deposit on a party came first. My survival came second, and not by a little. I filed that away the way I file everything, quietly, dated, in case it ever mattered. It would matter more than I could have guessed. The last straw of that first year came in October, a week before the wedding. I'd lost most of my hair by then, and wore a soft cap I'd bought online, and I decided against my own better sense, that I would go. Just sit in the back, just be there, the way a sister is. Then my mother called, and her voice had that careful, reasonable tone she used when she was about to ask for something unforgivable. She said it might be best if I didn't come. She said I looked unwell, that the photographs would last forever, that she didn't want anything to pull focus on Rachel's day. She actually used the word pull focus, like I was a stain on a tablecloth she'd noticed in time. I held the phone and looked at myself in the hallway mirror, thin and pale and bald, under a cotton cap, a woman fighting for her life, and I heard my mother ask me to spare the family the sight of it. I said, "Okay, one more. Okay." Then I hung up, and I didn't cry, which surprised me, because I'd expected to. Instead, I felt the last warm thing in me go cool and steady, like a thermostat finally clicking off. I stopped waiting for them that day. I stopped checking my phone for a change of heart that was never coming. In this family, I finally understood my pain would always be scheduled around someone else's celebration, and a person can only learn that lesson so many times before she stops signing up for the class. What I didn't know, sitting there in my quiet condo with a borrowed teal blanket on the couch, was that the waiting wasn't over. It was only about to switch directions and head straight for me. Barbara Ellison sat in the recliner next to mine, starting that November, a retired high school English teacher with a silk scarf tied over her own thinning hair and a thermos she refused to explain. She watched me work through one whole infusion, then leaned over and said, "In the driveway, teachers have that nobody should answer email while being poisoned. It sets a bad precedent." I laughed for the first time in weeks. After that, she just started showing up in the chair beside mine, scheduling her treatments to overlap with mine on purpose. Though she never admitted it. She brought a second cup so we could share whatever was in the thermos, which turned out to be a very strong ginger tea that helped with the nausea more than anything the doctors gave me. She'd been a widow for 9 years, and her only son lived 3 time zones away and called on Sundays. And she had decided, somewhere along the line, that loneliness was a problem you solved by adopting whoever was sitting next to you. One afternoon, she asked, plainly, who was driving me home. I gave my usual answer, that I was fine, and she gave me a look I recognized from every good teacher I'd ever had, the look that says, "I see the work you didn't turn in." "Family's just the people who keep showing up," she said, stirring her tea. "The rest is paperwork." I almost told her paperwork was my whole job. Instead, I let her drive me home that day, the first person to do it, and I sat in her passenger seat with the teal blanket folded on my lap and felt something I hadn't felt in months, which was the specific relief of not being the one in charge. I didn't know yet how much I'd come to need her. The wedding happened without me, exactly as planned. I saw it the way I saw everything now, secondhand on a screen, scrolling through photos a cousin tagged before someone thought to set them private. There was my mother in lavender, dabbing her eyes. There was Rachel, gold and glowing, and her new husband, Kevin, with his hand on her back. There was the whole real family, arranged on a lawn, captioned by my mother as the happiest day of our lives. I looked at it once, then closed the app and went to work, because work was the one place the numbers behaved. That week, by a coincidence I'd later stop believing was coincidence, Susan Caldwell handed me a new file. Susan was the attorney I worked under, 50-something and sharp as a tack, and the file was a man in his 70s who had signed his house over to his son to keep it safe, and now needed nursing care he couldn't get. Susan walked me through the trap of it. "People think gifting the house protects it," she said, tapping the deed. Usually, it just blows up the Medicaid math. She showed me the look-back period. The 5 years the state combs through for any transfer made for less than fair value, and the penalty divisor, the cold little formula that turns a gift into months and months of ineligibility. I learned that a house signed away too late doesn't shelter the parent, it strands them. I learned the exact arithmetic of it, the kind of thing you can do on a napkin once you know the divisor. I filed all of it away in the part of my brain that keeps useful things, never once thinking I'd run that math on my own mother. Then I drove home, past the church where my sister had just been married, and didn't slow down. The worst night came after my 4th cycle, when the cumulative weight of it finally crushed me flat. The nausea came in waves that didn't break, and the bone-deep ache made my own skin feel like a coat 2 sizes too small. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I called my mother, not because I expected her, but because 2 a.m. strips you down to your oldest instincts, and mine still reached for her in the dark. It rang, and went to a full voicemail box because she'd filled it leaving messages for caterers and honeymoon travel agents about Rachel's trip. I called again, same thing. I lay on my bathroom floor with the teal blanket pulled over me, the one piece of comfort I owned now, and it had stopped being a borrowed thing from the hospital. It was mine, the way the only loyal thing in a bad year becomes yours. Then I texted Barbara 3 words, "I'm not okay," and 40 minutes later, she let herself in with the spare key I'd given her without quite admitting why. She didn't say much. She sat on the cold tile beside me, held the wastebasket, and recited some poem under her breath until the worst of it passed, and I finally slept against her shoulder near dawn. My mother called back the next morning at a civilized hour, breezy, asking if everything was all right. She'd been buried in honeymoon logistics. I said it was nothing. I'd learned that anything I handed her would be set down somewhere and forgotten. From then on, I stopped calling people who only picked up for emergencies that weren't mine. The list of people I'd call at 2 a.m. had narrowed to exactly 1, and she wasn't related to me by a single drop of blood. That turned out to be the most important math of all. If you're watching this, and a particular face just came to mind, someone who only calls when they need something, you already know the feeling in my chest that year. I'm not telling you to go bitter, I'm telling you to notice who answers the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's your real family, blood or not. Stay with me because the part where the paperwork starts talking is coming. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you. A few weeks later, my mother called for one of her rare dutiful check-ins, the kind where she talked for 10 minutes about Rachel's new married life and asked me one polite question about my treatment near the end, like a tip left on the table. I'd have let it pass, like all the others, except for one thing she said, almost as an aside, that lodged in me like a splinter. She told me not to worry about the house. I hadn't asked about the house. There was a small silence while I tried to figure out why she'd brought it up, and then she went on, smoothing it over in that reasonable voice. "It's all handled," she said. "I've made sure it stays where it belongs, with the family, so you don't have to think about any of it." I asked her what she meant by handled. She got vague, the way she only got vague when she'd done something she didn't want examined, and pivoted back to Rachel's kitchen renovation. But I knew that tone. I'd heard it across 100 conference room tables, in the voices of clients describing transfers they half understood and fully regretted. Where it belongs, with the family, the real family. I sat with the phone after she hung up and felt the old splinter work itself deeper. In my line of work, the word handled almost always means a document exists somewhere with consequences nobody read. And there's exactly one kind of document that determines where a house belongs, and exactly one place those documents live once they're signed. I knew the place. I read it for strangers every single week. I just had never once thought to type my own mother's address into the search bar. That night, I couldn't stop thinking that maybe I should. For 3 days, I argued with myself about it. Looking up my mother's house in the county recorder's system felt like crossing some line, like reading a diary, even though I knew better than anyone that a recorded deed is the least private document a person owns. It's public on purpose. The whole system depends on anyone being able to see who holds what, so that no one can secretly sell out from under a buyer or a bank. I explained this to Barbara over the phone one evening, mostly to talk myself out of it, and she listened the way she did, patient and unbothered. "Emily," she finally said, "it's public. You're allowed to read public things. That's not snooping. That's just literacy." Something about the plainness of it cut through. I'd spent my whole life treating my mother's choices as weather, unknowable, something that simply happened to me. But a deed isn't weather. A deed is a fact with a date on it, filed and stamped, and available to anyone with the address and the patience to type it. The next afternoon, on my lunch break, I opened the recorder's portal I used a dozen times a day for clients, and for the first time, I put in the address of the house I grew up in. My hand wasn't steady, which annoyed me, because I'd typed 100 strangers' addresses into that same box without a flicker. I told myself it was probably nothing, a refinance, a corrected name, the ordinary churn of property records. I told myself my mother wouldn't have done the one thing I spent my career warning families against. I hit enter. The page loaded its little spinning wheel, and then the most recent recorded document on my childhood home appeared, dated 8 months earlier, right in the middle of my chemo. It was a quitclaim deed. Grantor, Linda M. Whitfield. Grantee, Rachel A. Whitfield, my sister's maiden name, recorded 3 weeks before her wedding. Consideration, $1. I read it 4 times the way I'd read Rachel's text, hunting for the misunderstanding, and just like before, there wasn't one. My mother had signed the house, the whole house, the one she swore would stay with the family, over to my sister for a single dollar. 8 months into my treatment. She'd done it in the same season she told me there was nothing extra to help with my bills. She'd done it while I was on a bathroom floor with a borrowed blanket, asking the dark for help. I printed it. I don't entirely know why. Some reflex told me to make the facts solid, to hold the date in my hand, and the firm's printer hummed out a copy of the recorded deed. And I folded it once and slid it into a manila folder, the way I'd done for 100 clients. This is the part where my job and my grief shook hands, because the moment I saw that $1 transfer, the second half of my brain, the trained half, did the arithmetic without being asked. 8 months ago meant the gift was sitting squarely inside the 5-year look-back, which meant that if my mother ever needed nursing-level care, that house, sold to my sister for $1, would not protect her. It would strand her, exactly like the old man in Susan's file. It would make her ineligible for months, maybe years, while someone scrambled to pay privately or undo it. I stood at that printer, holding the proof of how little I'd mattered, and underneath the hurt, cold and clear, a second understanding settled in. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd moved every asset out of reach behind my back, and one day, that decision was going to come due. I want to tell you I called my mother that night and let her have it. I didn't. I sat with the folded deed at my kitchen table for a long time, the teal blanket over my knees, and I thought about what a confrontation would actually buy me. A fight. Tears. Hers. Performed. Rachel rallying the relatives about how I was jealous and bitter and always had been. My mother recasting herself as the wronged party. A sick woman's daughter screaming at her over a house. I'd gain nothing but more proof in their eyes that I was the difficult one, so I did the harder thing, which was nothing. I slid the deed into a folder labeled with my mother's address, the same way I'd file any matter, and I put it in the drawer with my own important papers. It wasn't a secret, that's what steadied me. A secret is a thing you hide. This was a public record I'd simply chosen to read. The county had it stamped and dated whether I confronted anyone or not. Barbara came by that weekend, and I showed her the page, and she read it slowly, then folded it back up and handed it to me. "Knowing is enough, for now," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it. Just don't have to pretend anymore." And that was the gift of it, oddly. I stopped wondering whether my mother loved me a normal amount and was just bad at showing it. The deed answered the question for good. You don't sign your house to one daughter for $1 while telling the other there's nothing to spare. I went back to the only project that made sense, which was getting better and building a life they'd never see the inside of. The fact in the drawer could wait. Facts are patient that way. My last infusion came in the spring, and a few weeks after it, my scans came back clean for the first time. No evidence of disease. The doctor said it the careful way they say it, with the word remission doing a lot of quiet work. But Barbara whooped right there in the exam room and made the nurse hug me, and I let myself believe it for an afternoon. I'd survived the thing my family couldn't be bothered to watch me survive. Then I did what I always do. I went back to work on the structure of my life. I refinanced and folded the medical debt into something I could actually carry, and I started studying nights for the Certified Medicaid Planner credential, because if I was going to spend my days in this world, I wanted the letters that meant clients listened. I got a small raise and put most of it toward the loan. I learned to cook the few things that didn't turn my stomach during treatment and kept cooking them after, just to prove I could feed myself. None of this was dramatic. That was the point. While my family pictured me, if they pictured me at all, as the poor single daughter drowning in bills, I was quietly, methodically learning to read the water. I never told them any of it. There was no reason to. The less they knew about my actual life, the more wrong their assumptions would be on the day those assumptions finally mattered. I didn't have a plan yet, exactly. I just had a clean scan, a paid-down debt, a credential coming, a friend who answered at 2 a.m., and a folded deed in a drawer. It turns out that's not nothing. It turns out that's almost everything you need. 2 years went by, the way years do once you stop measuring them in appointments. My hair grew back, darker than before, and I stopped flinching every time I caught it in a mirror. I made Certified Medicaid Planner and started taking my own clients, families, sitting across my desk in the worst week of their lives, and I found I was good at the steadiness they needed. Barbara and I kept a standing Thursday dinner every week, no exceptions, the kind of reliable that I'd spent my whole life giving other people and never once receiving back. I learned what it felt like to be the one who got driven home. With my family, I kept the thinnest possible thread, a text on my mother's birthday, a thumbs up on a cousin's baby photo, nothing that required me to sit at a table. Now and then, my mother still posted the blue Pyrex on the group chat, the Sunday roast steaming on the counter, and one Thursday, I realized I'd scrolled past it without the old ache landing at all. The dish that had once meant the table I was cut from, now just meant a meal in a house I no longer needed a seat in. That was the surest sign I was actually free. Not that I'd stopped loving them, but that their picture of family had finally stopped being able to wound me. I thought I'd closed the book. I really did. I'd built a quiet, sturdy life out of the wreckage they walked away from, and I expected the rest of it to stay that way, distant and survivable. Then, on an ordinary Thursday evening, while I was chopping onions for Barbara's visit, my phone lit up on the counter with a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. And when I answered, she was crying. I almost didn't pick up. I stood there with the knife in my hand and the onions stinging my eyes and watched the screen buzz, and some old reflex, the one that ran my whole childhood, made me answer. Her voice was wrong from the first word, thin and frightened and slurred at the edges. She'd had a stroke, she said, 10 days ago, while I'd been living my ordinary life 2 suburbs over, and no one had thought to tell me. Later, I'd pieced together why. Rachel had told the relatives she had it handled and asked them not to drag me in until the family worked out what it actually needed, which is a polite way of saying, until the family needed me. I'd also muted the group chat months back, so the few worried hints anyone did post slid past me unread. Her left side wasn't working right. She couldn't manage the stairs, couldn't dress herself, couldn't be alone for long. She needed help, daily help, the hands-on kind, and she needed it for the foreseeable future. I leaned against my counter and let her talk, and I noticed the thing I would keep noticing for the rest of that night. She never asked how I was. She didn't ask if my scans were still clean, didn't ask whether the cancer she'd skipped had stayed gone, didn't seem to register that the last time we'd really spoken, I'd been fighting for my life she couldn't make room for. In her mind, I'd simply been on a shelf for 2 years, available, waiting, and now she was reaching for me again. You were always the strong one, Emily, she said through the tears. I need my strong girl now. I held the phone and felt the strangest calm, the calm of a thing arriving exactly on schedule. I'd known since the day I printed that deed that this call would come eventually. The math had guaranteed it. I just hadn't known it would arrive dressed as my mother's fear, asking for my body and my years in the same flat voice she'd once used to tell me she couldn't deal with my cancer. I said I'd think about it. Then I called Barbara. The family machine spun up fast once they smelled a solution. Rachel called me the next morning, brisk and organized, like she was assigning chores. She'd clearly already decided, with my mother, what was going to happen, and she was calling to inform me of my role in it. You work from home half the time, she said. You're single, you don't have kids. It just makes the most sense for you to move in with Mom. She framed it as logistics, as fairness, as the obvious arrangement any reasonable person would see. When I asked, mildly, why she couldn't do it, she had her reasons stacked and ready. She had Kevin, she had the baby, she had a life that couldn't simply be paused. And then she said it again, the same sentence from 2 years ago, like she didn't even hear herself, like it was a fact of nature rather than a knife. You don't have a family of your own to worry about, Em. I let the silence hang for a second before I answered. Funny, I said. 2 years ago, I wasn't family enough to visit a hospital. Now I'm family enough to move into one. She didn't have anything for that, so she moved to the part she was actually good at, which was making me the problem. Aunt Linda called an hour later to reinforce it because in my family, Aunt Linda is the enforcer, the one who shows up to remind you of your duty in the tone of a woman quoting scripture. A good daughter wouldn't even need to be asked, Aunt Linda told me. And here's the thing none of them mentioned, the thing they assumed I still didn't know. Not one of them brought up the house. They were arranging my mother's care like a family, with options. They had no idea I'd already read what they'd done with all of them. I know some of you are talking to your screen right now, telling me not to move in. Don't worry. But notice the thing I noticed. Not once did anyone ask if I was healthy. They asked if I was available. Those are not the same word, and the difference is the whole story. Stay with me, because there's a house and a deed and a number they all forgot to check. The invitation came a few days later, and it was almost too perfect. Rachel was throwing a housewarming. After 2 years, she and Kevin had finally finished renovating, and she wanted the whole family over to see the place and, in her words, sit down together and figure out Mom. I read the text twice. The house she wanted to show off, the house she'd renovated with such pride, was my childhood home, the one my mother had signed to her for $1 while I was bald and broke and begging the dark for help. And now she wanted to gather the relatives inside it, to pressure me, the spare daughter, into giving up my life to nurse the woman who'd given her the deed. They were going to do it in front of an audience, the way my family always operated, because a crowd makes a single person easier to corner. My mother would be there in her wheelchair, the picture of need. Aunt Linda would be there to quote duty. The cousins would be there to nod, and I was invited to play my assigned part, the dependable one, the one who says okay in her normal voice and starts packing. I sat with the invitation and felt something settle in me that wasn't anger, exactly, more like the clarity that comes when a problem finally shows you its actual shape. They wanted to use the house against me. They had no idea the house was the one thing in this entire story that was about to speak for me. I texted back 2 words, "I'll come." Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the recorder's site one more time to confirm nothing had changed, and called the one person who could tell me exactly what that $1 deed had set in motion. I laid it out for Susan the next morning, professional to professional, the way I'd present any case. Mother in her 60s, recent stroke, needs long-term care, primary residence, quick claim to the other daughter for $1, recorded 20 months ago. Susan didn't even reach for a calculator. She'd seen this exact wreck 100 times. So the house is gone from Mom's name, she said, and well inside the 5-year window. We ran the numbers together on the whiteboard. The home was worth around $355,200. You take that transferred value and you divide it by the state's penalty divisor, the average monthly cost of nursing care the state uses, which this year ran a little over $13,200 a month. $355,200 divided by roughly $13,200 comes out to about 28 months. 28 months, Susan said, capping the marker, during which Medicaid will not pay a dime toward her nursing care because she gave away the asset that was supposed to fund it. I asked about the ways out because there are always a few. They could private pay $13,200 a month out of pocket, which my mother didn't have because she'd given away the thing that was her money. They could apply for an undue hardship waiver, which in most cases gets denied. Or, Susan said, and this was the real one, my sister could deed the house back to my mother. In most cases, returning the asset undoes the transfer and clears the bulk of the penalty, she said, though it depends on the state, the timing, and how far along any application already is. And it's rarely as clean as one's signature. Still, the point held. The person sitting on the asset was the only one in a position to fix the math. I wasn't going to threaten anyone with this. I didn't have to. I was just going to be the only person in that housewarming who could actually read the deed out loud. I called Barbara that night and told her everything, the invitation, the math, the 28 months. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked the only question that mattered. What do you actually want, Emily? Not what would win. What do you want? I thought about it honestly. I didn't want the house. I didn't want my mother to suffer despite everything. I'm not built that way, and neither, I suspect, are most of you. What I wanted was to stop being the family's emergency fund made of flesh. I wanted to say the true thing out loud in front of the people who'd spent 2 years pretending it wasn't true. And then I wanted to drive home to my own life. You don't owe them your body, Barbara said, plainly the way she said everything. You already gave them 2 years of silence on a bathroom floor. That's paid in full. I told her I wasn't going there to punish anyone. I was going there to stop volunteering to be punished. She liked that. She told me to wear something that made me feel like myself, and to take my time, and to leave the second it stopped being useful. The next afternoon, before I drove over, I folded the teal blanket and set it on the passenger seat of my car. It had ridden with me to every infusion, sat on my lap the worst nights, become the one soft thing I'd kept from the hardest year of my life. I wasn't going to carry it into the party for show. I just wanted it there, in the car, the way you keep a hand on something solid. I was bringing my whole self to that house, the survivor, and the professional, and the daughter they'd written off. And the blanket was just the part of me I could hold. The house looked smaller than I remembered, and richer than it had any right to. Rachel had done well with someone else's gift. New shutters, a renovated kitchen I could see through the front window. The kind of upgrades you make when you're certain a place is yours forever. Cars lined the street, cousins and neighbors, the whole audience my family liked to perform in front of. I parked, left the blanket on the seat, and walked up the path I'd walked 10,200 times as a kid. Inside, the heat of bodies and the smell of food, and there on the dining table, in pride of place on the renovated island, sat the blue Pyrex, the same chipped casserole, steaming with my mother's pot roast. It had been handed down with the house, apparently, the ritual inherited along with the deed, the real family's dish, in the real family's kitchen. A few relatives clocked me with that particular gentleness people use on the poor relation. A cousin asking if work was treating me okay, an aunt telling me I looked tired, in the voice that means, you look poor. They thought they knew exactly who I was, the single one, the broke one, the one who'd say yes, because what else did she have going on? My mother sat in her wheelchair near the center of the living room, smaller than I'd ever seen her, and Aunt Linda stood at her shoulder, like a bailiff. Rachel floated through it all as hostess, gold and glowing, in her own front room. They had the scene set just the way they wanted it. The wheelchair, the crowd, the dutiful daughter walking in on cue. Every single person in that house thought they knew what I was going to say. Not one of them had read the document I'd read. I took a glass of water, found a chair, and waited for them to begin. They didn't make me wait long. After the plates were cleared, Aunt Linda tapped her glass and got the room's attention, because of course, this was going to be public. This was always going to be public. She started warm, talking about family and hard times and how, when one of us falls, the rest of us carry them. Then she turned to me and the warmth went thin. We all know Linda needs care now, she said, and we all know who's in the best position to give it. After everything your mother did for you, Emily. The room murmured its agreement, that low approving hum a crowd makes when it thinks it's watching virtue. My mother picked up her cue and began to cry, soft and practiced, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had ready. I need you, sweetheart, she said. You're the only one strong enough, the only one without a family pulling at her. Rachel chimed in from the doorway, helpful as a closing argument. "We figured you'd move in by the end of the month," she said. "It saves hiring someone, and it's not like you'd have to give up much." I sat still and let all of it land, every word, the way you let a wave pass over you instead of fighting it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tear up. I'd spent 2 years learning that the calmest person in a room is the one holding the actual facts, and I was, for once, the calmest person in the room. They were performing "Need" at me, a whole chorus of it, the wheelchair and the tissue and the crowd and the inherited casserole steaming on the island. I waited until Aunt Linda asked me directly, in front of everyone, whether I'd do my duty. Then I set down my glass of water, reached into my bag, and took out a single folded sheet of paper. The room didn't know it yet, but the paperwork was about to start talking. I unfolded the deed and laid it flat on the table next to the blue Pyrex, where everyone could see it. "Before anyone moves in with anyone," I said, "we should all be looking at the same facts. This is a recorded deed. It's a public document. Anybody in this room could have pulled it. I just happen to read these for a living. It shows that 20 months ago, 3 weeks before the wedding, Mom signed this house we're all standing in, over to Rachel for $1 while I was in chemo." The room went very quiet. Rachel's face did something complicated. I kept my voice level, the way I do across my desk with strangers. "Here's what that means for Mom's care," I went on, "because this is my actual job. When you give away your house inside 5 years of needing nursing care, the state counts it. There's a look-back period and a penalty. This house was worth about $355,200. You divide that by the state's monthly figure, a little over $13,200, and you get roughly 28 months. For 28 months, Medicaid will not pay 1 cent toward Mom's nursing care because the money that was supposed to cover it is sitting in this kitchen island." I let that breathe. Aunt Linda's mouth had come open. "So, somebody is going to be paying about $13,200 a month," I said. "Or somebody is going to have to deed this house back to Mom to undo the gift and clear most of the penalty. And there's really only one person who can do that. The house isn't in my name. It isn't in Mom's anymore either. It's in the name of whoever threw this housewarming. Not the daughter you skipped at the hospital, the daughter you handed the house to." I slid the paper an inch toward Rachel. "I'm not telling you what the law forces you to do," I said. "Nobody made you Mom's nurse by putting your name on a deed. I'm telling you who's holding the only asset that can fix this. That's not me being cruel. That's just where the house ended up." Then the room did what rooms do when the floor shifts under them. Rachel got loud first. "You just want the house back," she said, her voice climbing. "You've always been jealous. This is what this is really about." I didn't take the bait. "I don't want the house, Rachel," I said quietly. "I want you to understand what you signed up for when you took it." Kevin had gone pale beside her, and he wasn't yelling. He was doing the math. I could see it moving behind his eyes. $13,200 a month against a renovation they'd just poured their savings into. He turned to my mother, not to me. "Linda," he said, low and tight, "did you know about any of this when you signed it over?" And there it was, the first crack in the real family. The son-in-law, turning toward the woman who'd handed them a poisoned gift. My mother, cornered, did the only thing she'd ever known how to do. She cried harder, and then, when the tears didn't move me, she pivoted to anger. "How could you?" she said to me. "How could you embarrass me like this, in front of everyone, after I raised you?" For 1 second watching her, small and frightened in that wheelchair, I felt the near thing, the human pull of it, an old woman scared of what's coming, and I let myself feel it. Because I'm not a monster, and neither are you. I just wanted to keep the house in the family, she whispered, for the grandchildren. And maybe that was even true. But notice, she didn't say sorry. Notice that even now, exposed in her own gifted kitchen, the thing she reached for wasn't an apology to the daughter she'd left bald and broke and alone. It was blame and self-pity, and the same flat insistence that my job was to absorb the cost of her choices. The near sympathy passed through me and out the other side. She was human. She was still wrong. The room waited. That's the thing about a crowd assembled to corner one person. It doesn't disperse just because the script changed. It just turns to watch the new ending. My mother gathered herself and asked me the question she'd brought me there to answer. The question the wheelchair and the tissue and the casserole had all been arranged around. "So you'll come take care of me," she said. "You'll move in. I need you, Emily." I looked at her for a long moment. My mother, who 2 years ago had a daughter call her crying with cancer and decided a wedding mattered more. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strange grace of it. I just felt clear. All the way down. I thought about the exact words she'd used on that call, the ones I'd carried like a stone in my shoe for 2 years. "We can't deal with this right now." And I gave them back to her, trimmed down to the only 4 that mattered, in the same calm voice she'd once used on me. "I can't deal either." The words sat in the middle of that room, and nobody breathed. Aunt Linda's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Rachel went white. My mother stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. And maybe I had. The language of a no she never thought I'd learn. "Talk to the new owner," I added, and I tipped my head toward my sister, toward the woman whose name was on the deed steaming next to the pot roast. I wasn't cruel about it. I didn't need to be. The facts were doing all the cruelty anyone could want, and I'd long since learned that the calmest person in the room is the one who doesn't have to raise her voice. I stood up, I picked up my bag with the folded deed back inside it, and I left them my water glass and nothing else. I didn't slam anything. I walked through the front room, past the cousins who'd come to watch a duty get assigned, and instead watched it get handed back. Past the inherited blue Pyrex going cold on the island, past the door I'd come through 10,200 times as a kid. Aunt Linda caught up to me on the path, breathless, playing the last card my family had. "But she's your mother," she said. "This is family." I stopped and turned around. "Family doesn't bill you for the years you survived alone," I said. I got in my car. The teal blanket was right there on the passenger seat where I'd left it, soft and worn and entirely mine. The one thing that had actually stayed with me through the worst of it. I rested my hand on it for a second, the way you touch something solid to make sure you're really standing. Then I started the engine and pulled away from the house my mother gave away for $1. And I didn't look in the mirror because there was nothing back there I needed to see again. I'd carried myself into that room. I carried myself out. For the first time in my life, walking away from that family felt less like losing them and more like finally being allowed to keep myself. Here's how it actually shook out, because I know you want to know. The math doesn't care about feelings, and the math had them cornered. After a few weeks of panic and a consultation with a real attorney, Rachel and Kevin did the only sensible thing. They deeded the house back to my mother. Returning the asset cleared most of the penalty, their lawyer told them, and it took the fairy tale right along with it, the one where the place had ever truly been theirs. Then, they had to sort out my mother's care like a family with consequences instead of a family with a spare daughter, which meant hiring professionals, and splitting the cost. The responsibility landing at last on the people who'd accepted the asset. Kevin, I heard, stopped speaking to my mother for a while. The gift had nearly sunk him, and he knew it. Aunt Linda went very quiet. A couple of cousins texted me privately to say they hadn't known about the deed and that what was done to me wasn't right, which I appreciated more than I expected to. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it. I just went back to my life, the one I'd built out of the wreckage they walked away from. I kept my Thursday dinners with Barbara, my real family, the one I chose in a chemo chair. I took on more clients and got better at the steadiest part of the job, sitting with people in the worst week of their lives and helping the numbers make sense. I didn't cut my mother off completely. I'm not interested in being the kind of person who slams every door forever, but I never moved in. Never became the unpaid hands she'd assumed were hers by default, and I stopped pretending the thinness of what we have is anything other than what it is. I send my mother a card on her birthday. I just don't send myself anymore. That, it turns out, is the whole difference between love and a debt someone else decided you owed. If I leave you with one thing, let it be this. Love is something you choose to give, never a debt that someone gets to collect from your body and your years. And the people who only call you family when they need something have already told you, in the plainest language there is, exactly where you stand. So, believe them the first time, and save yourself the 2 years it took me to finally listen. That's my story. A house signed away for $1, a blanket from strangers, and 4 words it took me 2 years to earn. If this reminded you that being available and being loved are not the same thing, take that as your sign to protect your peace today. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.